What's the most embarrassing thing accidentally sent by email at your work? I once sent out an email to 15,000 people, including the chief executive and directors, where the subtitles on the YouTube video preview embedded in the email said, "Up the arse," if I wasn't doing everything right. I'd filmed a case study of someone who had a liver transplant, and one of our support workers were helping her. She said, "And my support worker, Sharon, was amazing. She'd give me a kick up the arse if I wasn't, etc." Unfortunately for me, the YouTube preview selected the exact moment where it says, "Up the arse." I proofread that email 10 times but completely missed it. I was in the chief exec's office within 5 minutes. Story 2. I accidentally sent a rude joke reply to a teammate's request as banter, and then added in another teammate to carry on the banter. I'm sure it was nothing too bad, but the C word was used. Anyway, as he was sitting across from me, I expected a reaction, but nothing came. Double-checked, and I'd sent it to another person of the same name who happened to be a director of a customer. Immediately, I went sheet white and was thinking, I'm done for. Luckily, however, I engaged my brain and remembered I was the email admin for that customer. And with a few clicks, I was able to delete the email sharpish and very luckily before he read it. Story 3. One of the senior managements was leaving, and as it was, during COVID, they emailed out a resignation speech they'd filmed. The CEO replied to all saying, "What the fuck is this? Duck off already." Story 4. This isn't an email I've sent, but it is the most awkward email I've ever seen myself. A senior director came back from maternity leave many years ago, and an email was sent around the whole company welcoming her back. It was the usual fluff, and the email contained a picture of the newborn baby. About 2 minutes after this initial email was sent, an employee accidentally, I hope it was an accident, replied to the whole company with the response, "What an ugly kid. Definitely got her mother's looks." Seemed like someone tried to email another worker and completely got it wrong. The whole building was chaos for the next half an hour. 750 employees laughing/taking about what had just happened. Story 5, who was a manager, drafted an email for his girlfriend B, who was not a manager, for her to send to all her colleagues, containing among other things quite a lot of criticism of her departmental management. At the bottom, he added a comment that it ought to make the idiots pay attention, and even her colleagues, who were all brain dead, could understand. He added that she should cut and paste the words into a fresh email and send it to everyone. She just forwarded the whole damn thing, his comments and all, to her whole department. The sky fell in. Story 6. A very prissy colleague at work once gathered us around a computer to show us some of her holiday photos. The first photo that popped up was one of her husband's junk. She left the company within a few months. Story 7. I sent an email to our next shift informing them of the turnover item. I typed "Hello, first crap" instead of shift. One of my colleagues on that shift called me and said, "That was the funniest thing ever." There are around 30 people on that email distro. Story 8. Oh man, I cringe just thinking about this. One of my first real jobs was working logistics in a warehouse. The place had a very boys club atmosphere, and I got along really well with the warehouse manager. We'd joke around constantly and send each other all sorts of wildly inappropriate memes and over-the-top stuff by email. At the time, email still felt kind of new to me, and I clearly didn't understand it well enough. One weekend, my manager and I went out for drinks, and he ended up going home with a woman quite a bit older than him. So, Monday morning, thinking I was hilarious, I sent him a pretty outrageous meme poking fun at the situation with the subject line, "This is you, mate." Except, I didn't just send it to him. I accidentally sent it to my big boss, who was in his late 70s. I didn't realize what I'd done until he appeared at my office door, raised an eyebrow, and calmly read the subject line back to me. My entire soul left my body. I turned bright red. He paused, then asked, "Wrong person?" I laughed nervously, apologized, and for reasons I still don't understand, tried to explain the whole backstory, which, of course, did not make it better. Luckily, we were a small company, no HR department, and the big boss was well aware of the culture in the warehouse. He just looked at me and said, "People lose their jobs over things like that. I don't think you want to lose yours over something so silly. Don't do it again." I have never triple-checked an email recipient list so carefully in my life. Story 9. I used to work at a plush manufacturer. We were discussing which Sesame Street character we should do. I suggested Snuffleupagus, and my teammate Maria had never heard of him. So I sent a pic of him to a different Maria. No context, just a pic of Snuffleupagus to a different Maria, who I have never spoken to base in South America. Story 10. This wasn't done accidentally, but boy, it was epic. I used to work for an outsourced aid company, and our top salesman was a real, I'm sure you can picture the type. Total slime ball, way too much aftershave, flashy car, suits too tight. Anyway, one day everyone in the office got an email from him, basically saying, "I'm a cheating piece of crap," with a photo attached of him standing naked in the mirror, fully erect. The guy's wife had found sexting conversations with other women on his work phone and decided to let all his colleagues know about it. Story 11. My first job out of uni I also happened to work with one of my best friends. A few months into the job, we had both been given a first official warning for emailing each other too much using our work emails. Fair enough. We stopped emailing each other at work. A few weeks later, we started to get heavy snow during the workday. My boss emailed everyone to say we could leave early to avoid the snow. I meant to email my friend to ask if she wanted to come to mine, as I lived in walking distance, and she had to drive home, and suggested we could get some snacks and wine and watch a film and make a night of it. 2 seconds later, I get a phone call from my boss. Of course, I had replied to her instead of sending it to my friend. "Did you mean to send me that?" she asked. Not wanting to be in any more trouble, I had to pretend that I had indeed meant to send it to her, as I knew she had a long way to go home and didn't want her to get stuck in the snow. Story 12. A very high-up executive sent his secretary and the entire Southeast region his itinerary for a week-long business trip around Africa and the Middle East, including detailed demands of which flights should be business class and which flights should be first class, which specific hotels to stay in, etc. All, of course, wildly in abeyance to the travel policy U.S. proles have to abide by. Rather riskily, a few reply allied to it. Story 13. I did some work for a female entrepreneur who happens to have a large bosom. Signing off on the email, I intended to say, "I hope you're busy," but accidentally said, "I hope you're bust," before clicking send. I instantly realized my error and hastily penned a follow-up correction, which I also got wrong, writing, "I hope you're busty." Story 14, not strictly an email. I gave people access to a Dropbox account I set up to share and manage coding tests we sent out to candidates. I had access on my phone, and it automatically backed up all the photos from my phone. The photos were me posing topless. Dude, it was very funny. We were a small, close office that has a lot of banter. It was all in good taste, but the embarrassment was real. Before I knew it, there were mouse mats, calendars. I featured on many items of company stationery for a long time. I turned up as a random surprise slide in internal company presentation. It was great fun. Story 15. I recorded a Zoom for my work meeting as a new colleague wasn't able to make it. The Zoom feature wasn't working, so I recorded it from my computer itself, meaning it didn't just stop recording audio when it finished the meeting, but continued. I didn't realize this and sent it a few hours later over WeTransfer. I then realized a little later that it took surprisingly long to send. It should have been only a few megabytes, but was bigger. Then realized I'd captured 2 hours of me and my boyfriend chatting, complaining about work, specific people, and some not appropriate for work at all chat, too. Thank the Lord that the lady hadn't downloaded it yet. I trimmed and resented, with a slightly threatening tone, saying that I was so glad she hadn't downloaded the wrong one. Please don't. WeTransfer will tell me if you do. Story 16. I signed off an email with "kind retard" to a client who had a son with Down syndrome. He was very upset, raised a complaint, and called in basically daily to demand that I be fired. He also wanted me to phone them to apologize to his son. Thankfully, my boss was aware that this was a typo rather than a malicious message. Story 17. A colleague and I was at an event where lots of members of staff from the organization were all sat in the same room. There was someone sat on the other side of the room, and we were trying to remember her name, but for the life of us, we could not remember. Anyway, event finished, and off we went back to our respective offices. My colleague had a brainwave and suddenly remembered the person's name and went to send me an email with the name all in capitals, large font size, bold with 3 exclamation marks, but obviously in her excitement, sent it to the person whose name we were trying to work out. So this person who we barely knew got an email with just her name is massive bold letters and added punctuation. We didn't know until she simply replied, "Yes, I am crying, laughing, thinking about this now, and it was about 20 years ago." Story 18. A girl I used to work with sent an email slagging off the boss to the boss. We were all sat in the office at the time, and I distinctly remember our boss rising from her desk and saying, "Jane, outside, please." None of us knew what was going on until Jane came back in with a face like a beetroot and told us what had happened while the boss had a. To be fair to Jane, our boss was an arsehole. Story 19. At work, I sent a rather rude joke to a few friends. I didn't realize that I had made a mistake with the friends list until the CEO, who had a very similar name to one of my friends, sent a reply saying, "I don't get this. Is it a joke or something?" Story 20. I typed to a major client, "Listen here, you freak," in an email that had several external people and groups, as well as our entire office, in copy. I was joking aloud what I should type to this guy who was getting on my nerves. I accidentally typed what I was saying and sent it. The colleague sitting nearest to me absolutely cracked up, laughing about 30 seconds after I hit send. His face went red and he could hardly breathe, but I still recall him saying, "What have you done?" Soon enough, I found out. Had a lot of people saying their goodbyes, thinking the guy would complain about being insulted and I would get fired. Somehow I got away with it scot-free. The guy actually called the office later that day to speak to me. We had a phone conversation as if it never happened. Not sure if he ignored the insult, laughed it off, or felt like he deserved it. I never asked. Story 21. One of the upper management colleagues in my office sent out a calendar invite to the whole office for her that time of the month schedule. I still wonder if it was deliberate or an accident. Story 22. When I was a teacher, I issued a detention to a student. When that's input on the system, it notifies relevant people like the parents, form tutor, head of house, etc. I then got an email from another teacher in the school asking me what had happened to warrant the detention and could I elaborate on the system information. I assumed she was his form tutor. I outlined, very bluntly, that he'd been incredibly rude and done this, that, and the other. That's typically how teachers will communicate these things to each other, but is far more blunt than how we'd express it to their parent. See below for the difference. I got an email back saying that they were disgusted and would be having strong words when he got home. At that point, I checked the email address to realize it wasn't another teacher. It was the parent who happened to have the same name, first and last, as another teacher. Example, to a parent. Good afternoon. Unfortunately, I have had to issue a detention for Jack today in science. Jack's behavior has been deteriorating over the last few lessons, and I had given him warnings and spoken to him about our expectation. Today, Jack decided to take another student's iPad and use it to search for inappropriate content, for which he received his warning. He subsequently failed to complete the work that was set, despite me checking in on him and offering support. I've issued him a break time detention for Thursday and explained to him why. I'd greatly appreciate if you could discuss with Jack why this is unacceptable and let me know if there's anything further I can be doing to support Jack. All the best, Miss X. To the teacher. Jack was an absolute nightmare today, to be honest. He's been getting worse over the last few weeks since he broke up with Millie, and it feels like he's constantly trying to get her attention. I think this might be the only class he shares with her. I've spoken to him about it before, but it's fallen on deaf ears. Today, he took Millie's iPad and decided to Google big junks, and I like big junks, so I had to follow up with Alex to ensure Millie doesn't get a safeguarding flag for that. Then, he refused to do any work from that point onwards. He knows it's unacceptable, and I've given him a lot of leeway because I know he's struggling. Unfortunately, I can't allow him to continue disrupting everyone else's learning. Story 23, not an email, because the 80s, but back in the day, I was a shorthand secretary. I once mistranscribed the boffins in your office to the buffoons in your office. I only realized when filing the carbon copy. Nobody picked up on it. Also typed the date in a letter to Germany, 31st Germany, 1980. Story 24. Some bean counter sent a spreadsheet containing the salaries of the entire senior leadership of a multi-billion tech co to everyone in EMEA, swiftly followed by a recall and an email saying if anyone opened the first email, they would be fired immediately. They were monitoring the Outlook server for compliance. Corporate banished the original email not long after. Loads of us had already opened it and seen it by then, though. Story 25. Back in the day when the annual pension review was due, you responded to an email from HR informing them if you would like to adjust your contribution. The CFO replied to all stating not a percentage value, but an exact monetary amount. Cue frantic attempt 2 minutes later to recall it. Story 26. In response to the question, "Who is Justin Bieber?" my colleague responded, "He's a lesbian," along with an edited photo of his head on a bikini-clad lady's body. He had not realized the CEO was copied into the original question. Story 27. My company, Digital Marketing, once sent out an email for a very well-known major client which clipped the subject line, "Give your mum the gift of Cumberbatch this Mother's Day," to "Give your mum the gift of cum," on some iPhone models. Story 28. I once set my out of office before I was going away and somehow set it to reply to every single email I had ever received. Literally thousands and thousands of emails. People who weren't even at my company were calling up to ask what was going on. Someone I emailed regularly later told me they had to reset their device because it froze and couldn't keep up with my emails. Horrendously embarrassing. Story 29. My Lithuanian ex used to call me Monkey as a cute nickname. In her language and in our relationship, it was completely harmless and affectionate. One day, though, she accidentally texted her manager, love you, monkey," and immediately realized something was very wrong. She hadn't understood that in English, especially in certain contexts. That word can be extremely offensive and carry a lot of historical weight. When I explained it to her, she was mortified. She quickly clarified that the message was meant for her boyfriend, not her boss, and apologized right away. Thankfully, her manager was understanding, but it was a very intense lesson in how differently words can land across cultures. Story 30. One of my managers sent an email to everyone in the company, let us know someone was leaving to pursue new challenges. The person in question responded to say how terrible the management was, and she was leaving due to bullying and incompetence on their part. They did not delete from the server quick enough, and my morning coffee was the best it had ever tasted. Also got screenshots in case someone didn't get to see the original. Story 31. One of the previous vicars at the church sent me an email informing me the thing I needed was on the hard junk of the computer. As she didn't combust from embarrassment, I assume she never noticed. Story 32. I worked in a call center once, and an email went around asking everyone to make sure they take everything off of the floor before they leave because the floor was being deep cleaned. I meant to forward it to my friend, but I ended up replying to the head of facilities, something along the lines of, finally cleaning up this flea-infested crap hole. I came in the next morning, and my manager sat me down and held up my email printed out Story 33. Once received a company-wide email saying that we could all clock off half an hour early on the 23rd of December, and one of the junior staff in my office sent a reply, all, which included all of the executives, HR, and every single member of staff in the dozen or so offices around the country, saying something along the lines of, that'll make up for not getting a Christmas bonus. She was quickly whisked into our regional manager's office. Story 34. Oh, at an old workplace, my line manager was a horrendous bully and, for some reason, disliked me. I think it's because the other people on the team would simper after her and join in the bullying of other people, but I hated it. One of her favorite things was to offer me chicken nuggets / ham / sausage rolls every lunch and then act shocked that I was a vegetarian and get everyone to join in mocking me like, not even chicken nuggets, what do you even eat? Anyway, one time, she went through my HR records without asking permission and emailed them to another manager, the CEO, mocking me and my health issues, making light of the fact my mom was about to die, and how I used it as an excuse to be upset at work, that she was spying on the CCTV and all this really horrible stuff. And she accidentally sent it to me instead of the CEO. She asked to use my PC for a minute. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. She went on my emails and deleted it. What she didn't realize is that I was the Outlook admin. I recovered the emails and sent them to my personal inbox. She didn't even apologize. She said, well, it's good to know what everyone thinks of you. This was the same company that made me redundant the week after my mom's funeral. Story 35. HR once sent out an email to everyone asking the woman who was leaving her soiled sanitary towel on top of the toilet paper dispenser to please use the she bin instead. A male director replied asking why they felt the need to inform the male staff too. Story 36. I work for an NHS trust. Several years ago, there was an email sent out to everyone whose email was attached to the trust. It was a kind of one-off. I can't recall what for, but it was to notify people of password or security changes or something. Some bright spark and some admin somewhere read the email as if it was directed at them and not a generic message. Typed a crafty reply, then clicked reply to all, everyone in the trust, which started a weird feedback loop of automatic replies out of office which kicked back to everyone, crippling the whole email system for like 48 hours. I still don't pretend to understand what happened, but it started like email WW3, then everyone died. Story 37, quite possibly the best typo of all time. Someone emailed my colleague asking if they had any lanyards, pens, etc. to give out to some people at an event. She mistyped the word hunt and so sent the immortal line, I'll some out for you tomorrow, which I actually still say to this day. Story 38. HR accidentally mailed out the entire department's individual sick leave taken for the year. That was a bit of a howler. It was also an eye-opener to see just how much some people are off. Story 39. It was a Friday, and two guys who sat opposite each other had been bantering about what they'd like to do their female colleague over the weekend. She then comes back to her desk, and they move to continue their conversation by email. Unfortunately, Wes Courtver sent the first email put the word weekend into the CC field, and not the subject field. He sent the mail, and the system matched the word weekend to a distribution list called Weekend Working, and the email went to all of the members of that list, a number of whom then of course forwarded it on as the message cascaded across the office. Both men were escorted out of the office a couple of hours later, never to return. Story 40. Not sure why, but a company I used to work for had their email set up so that if you put .com instead of .co.uk, it would send the email to everyone in the company. A girl wrote a confession of love to a boy in another department and put .com by accident. It was super cringy. Story 41. My old manager sent the spreadsheet that had all of our clients on and how much they pay for our services to the entire customer base. The phones went bezek for an hour as he answered them to put out fires. Some customers were really happy with the value they were getting for their money, but some were pissed at being charged nearly twice as much for less. Story 42. We just had a new internal news system for our staff installed. My teammate wanted to put a funny message up for our team to see. An Alan Partridge aha photo. Ended up sending it to everyone in the organization. Very good. Very funny. Story 43. Less cringe, but working in it, I've had always HR. People call me asking to retract an email, which you can do internally and on Exchange best. One was they managed to email the salary database Excel sheet to a mailing list. I, of course, grabbed a copy and kept it for myself. Story 44. I once wrote good morning at the start of an email when it was in fact the afternoon. It was so embarrassing that I had to quit my job, change my name, and start a new life abroad. Story 45. The day after announcing record profits, the company in their wisdom announced a reorg and resulting redundancies to help make even more money. The entire facilities and catering team were told all their jobs were all redundant and to be replaced by an external firm who was cheaper. A week later, numerous screenshots from CCTV were emailed around the place. Jaws hit the floor. The pics helped explain some of the promotions that had recently happened. That boardroom table had seen a lot of action. Another email outed the Phantom Crapter. Golden rule of work. Always be on the right side of the facilities team. They hold all they dirty secrets. Story 46. Myself and my boss did a load of extra work for a high-profile project. The director in charge sent out an all-company email thanking everyone by name when it was a success. Everyone except me and my boss. I forwarded it to my boss and added, FFs, no mention of us at all. Except I didn't forward it, I replied. Story 47. Not by email, but updated a permanent record that could not be changed with a misspelling of the word cut. I added an extra letter to make that word. Joy. Story 48. This fits, but only by a technicality. My work group in a very large firm was just 3 people, 2 fellas and I. These 2 co-workers would regularly share amusing emails that they did not share with me. And I was totally good with that, but sometimes, if I went into their office, which they shared, they might show me one from time to time. We were all pretty good mates, despite me not being a bloke, but I'm very broad-minded and often they were hilarious. Anyway, now you know the backstory. On this particular day, we had been informed by the IT department that a number of computers had to have something or other done to them manually. So on-site IT staff would be making the rounds to do the job, which would take each PC about a minute. It was lunchtime, and as more often than not, we 3 were eating at our desks when the senior IT guy rocked up to do my work colleagues' PCs. Having finished my lunch, I wandered into my colleague's office to shoot the breeze with the IT guy, who I was friends with. He was about 60 years old, very religious, quiet, softly spoken, but with that IT guy nerd sense of humor I appreciate. He'd done one workmate's computer and was talking to me as he logged into my other workmate's PC, only to be greeted by the email the other workmate had just sent. A very graphic photo of a naked woman lying down facing the viewer, legs spread-eagled, to which someone had stuck 2 adhesive googly eyes to her full frontal, displayed to the viewer pink bits. My workmate spluttered out a stammering apology, absolutely white-faced. Never seen this fella so scared in all my born days. But imagine watching this gray-haired, super religious IT dude be exposed to the contents of the email that my colleague had neglected to close before lunchtime. And you may just get an idea of the level of his discomfiture. To IT dude's credit, he simply closed the email as if he hadn't seen it and did what he had to do before leaving the office on his rounds to the next PC. The atmosphere in the office was about 90% cringe, but I thought it a thing of such hilarity that I lost my crap laughing the moment the IT guy was out the main doors. I couldn't breathe for a good long while, nearly choking myself in the process while my 2 workmates verbally abused the crap out of each other, thinking they were likely to lose their jobs over the unfortunate image. Eventually, though, they too began to laugh, but I left them deal with their mortification while I returned to my own desk, occasionally breaking out into another round of laughter. I can only guess what their next email to all their friends was about. It's a wonder they didn't get an official reprimand, honestly. Story 49. I work in TV. One thing you can do is make a viewing file for producers called a Karen. Burned in timecode, shows a clock so you can get notes back. I have frequently had my phone change it to Karen file, so I'm asking the ops if they have send that Karen file yet. Story 50. The source code to our own product. Not by me, I hasten to add. Actually, mistakes happen. That wasn't the most embarrassing thing sent. It was the follow-up email from the poor guy asking for it back. Story 51. Min sent an email to all, with all staff photos in it. They were all .tiff files, very big, that froze any computer the email was opened on. Not embarrassing though. Story 52 reminds me of a few years ago when someone sent a test email to a select group within an NHS trust, but instead sent test email to every single NHS email address in the country. The entire NHS email system crashed, and made worse by people keep on replying to the email. I was tempted to reply. Story 53. When I worked in payroll, my manager was teaching me how to add new starters into the system. She said I could just make up a person, so me being a silly 18-year-old decided to write down poo face on one diarrhea road. Unfortunately, it saved, and I had to call the accounts department to remove it. Story 54. I used to run a quotes list monthly. People would send me out of context quotes said around the office. I would collate them and email them around every month. People would CC in the person they were quoting to be polite, and we would all get a good laugh out of it. One month, one of the sales guys sent me a screenshot of a Google chat conversation between him and one of his sales colleagues, let's call her Laura, about the world record poo she'd just done. This guy emailed it to me and politely CC'd in Laura, except he'd added the wrong Laura, and instead sent it to a client. So, just to recap, he sent an email to me detailing his coworkers' massive poo, with screenshots attached. Surprisingly, the sales guy still works there and barely got a scolding for it. Story 55. Someone emailed a picture of Beastman, one of the villains from He-Man Masters of the Universe, to a company director by mistake without any context whatsoever, just a picture in an email with no text or subject or anything. This was based on a conversation in the office about cartoon. Someone went into autopilot and sent it to the wrong person. Story 56. Sort of by email, a former colleague of mine was trying for a baby and managed to sync her ovulation schedule with a shared company calendar. Kind of useful information, to be honest. Story 57. Colleague did something not by email, but by shared drive. She backed up her phone to a company shared drive with open permission. All of her bits happened to be on display upon open this shared drive, presented in large thumbnail. Seems she was on the prowl with the volume of pictures we had to sift through and remove. Story 58. Guy I worked with sent an email notification to all 340 retail stores about new discount codes available on the till, except he didn't spell check, and it had the word discount in block capitals at the top of the email. That was his nickname for a few months. Story 59, HR once sent out an email to all staff attaching a document with everyone in the company's old and new salaries on it. It was annual salary review time. I'm not sure if it was meant to go to just one of the directors, or if she attached the wrong file. We got a panicked email follow-up asking everyone to delete that email and not read the attachment. Obviously, we all followed those instructions. Found out while everyone on lower levels was being told pay rises were capped at 1% that year. The management staff were all getting at least 10% pay rises. A lot of staff left in the months that followed. Story 60. The woman who was working with an external organization who do work around uplifting women in the workplace meant to FWD their response to a colleague named Alex with comment, "She's being ducking difficult, isn't she?" but mistyped Alex and sent it to all London office. Story 61. Back in the 1990s, I worked for a large internet service provider, and one of the tech support guys sent a joke, in good taste, about someone else in their team to most of the company. Nothing wrong so far. Note, average age in the company was about 25, and the tech support guys were at the low end, so there was a lot of banter. The butt of the joke used the text banner program to send a full-screen reply of ducking duckface, but replied to all instead of to the sender. He realized almost immediately and went to his team leader's office, saying, "I've done something terribly wrong." She was ready to try to get him out of trouble, but he mostly got away with it. Because while the texts all used a fixed font, old style, email client, the upper management, HR, and other humorless people were all using an early version of Outlook which used a proportional font by default. The proportional formatting bent the banner layout so much they couldn't read it. Lucky chap. Story 62. It's not what I sent, but who I sent it to. I kept accidentally emailing a client called Tracy things that were meant for a client called Sharon, and vice versa. They were both rude and a bit on the larger side, and I'd been reading Viz at the time. Hopefully they thought I liked watching Birds of a Feather. Story 63. Used to work at a drama college. A member of staff sent out an email to a whole year group with a spreadsheet listing which students had been cast in which roles in upcoming shows. Very standard, except they forgot to delete the columns which ranked and commented on each student's skills in different areas. So for each student, there was a comment like, good dancer, average singer, poor actor. Students could be sensitive about casting decisions at the best of times. So this understandably caused a bit of drama. Story 64. I'd been having banter with one of my colleagues, and he joked that he was going to tell one of the board of directors who happened to work on our team something ridiculous. I went to email the colleague saying, "You big fat liar," but sent it to the director instead, who was known for being someone you did not mess with. He was at lunch at the time, so I had to wait for him to get back, immediately go over to him and explain the situation. Thankfully, he saw the funny side, and I still work with him 15 years later. Story 65. The receptionist emailed the whole office to tell everyone the sandwich van was outside. Unfortunately, the email chain below was a back and forward with her boyfriend, who also worked with the company, which detailed their sexy time the night before. It went into great detail if that many memes were created liking her to being as wet as a knackered fridge. Hilarious, but I felt for the poor woman. Story 66, a project manager, rightly, sent a sonogram to the whole team, chewing us out for a series of duck-ups on this one customer project. It was frustrating because any of us could have caught the mistake, but none of us did. Anyhow, after telling us all about our lack of care and how disappointed he was in us, sorry, Julian, he finished up with, I expect a more professional approach from all of you. Ongoing. Riard, Julian. He wasn't wrong, but it wasn't intentional either. Story 67. A colleague scanned a document. It gets emailed to him. He leaves the printer, still logged in. Another colleague swoops in and scans a one-finger salute. That also gets emailed to the first guy, who has just reached his computer and forwards the attachment in his most recent email to a member of the public. Whoops. Actually, the most embarrassing I've seen was an email from someone 5 ranks above me and completely irrelevant in the organization, which still had a feedback email from a lackey, 4 ranks above me and paid 60 to 70,000 a year, saying, "Oh, yes, sir, that's a great email draft." And that's the only input I have ever seen either of those people make. Nothing dramatic, just pathetic. In an email going to nearly 10,000 people. Story 68. I managed actually the laziest person in the world. This is fact. I wrote my colleague, another manager, an emailing asking if this person had done any ducking work today. I've sent it to her and not my colleague. That took some ass licking. Story 69. Someone once sent an all-staff at a huge multinational recruitment company asking if anyone spoke/read Egyptian and could translate the attached marriage certificate of one of their candidates. It tried to request people stop replying, but it paralyzed the email servers for the best part of half a day. Story 70. Someone once sent a very personal email explaining they needed time off because their wife was having a medical procedure. That alone probably should have gone straight to HR or their manager. Instead, somehow it was sent company-wide to about 250 employees. Way more detail than anyone needed. The entire office saw it, and there was this collective moment of, why did we all just read that? To his credit, nobody really brought it up afterward. If it had been about something he was personally going through, he probably never would have heard the end of it. But since it involved his wife, everyone just quietly agreed to pretend it never happened. Story 71. I'm a teacher. Over the weekend, all staff got an email telling us that one of our colleagues had passed away. However, the head, for God knows what reason, had decided to forward an email chain and use that to email all staff, deleting all the other emails in the chain, but keeping the insensitive subject line. It was a really disrespectful way to learn that a colleague had died. Story 72. A colleague once did that, sending a text to the person the text was about. It was meant to be to me, moaning about our boss and saying what a POS he was, but instead he sent the message to that boss. Story 73. I sent my meeting notes over without checking the shorthand I used while quickly typing. I didn't realize that I had abbreviated associate doctors to ASDoc. Story 74. Colleagues sent a bunch of important people a link to the Sexual Freedom Coalition instead of the Skills Funding Council. Boss was not amused. Story 75. Not as scandalous, but still pretty funny. We had an email come through about a vehicle collision one of our workers was involved in, nothing serious. And my colleague replied, all saying LMAO, which was meant to be a reply to an earlier email from me. Story 76. A colleague sent a load of adult attachments on an email to approximately 10 of us. We all got on, but I told him straight away not to send anymore by return email. I got pulled in and blocked for not reporting it straight away. He was kept on and behaved after. I was pissed off because I needed the goodwill of people to do my job. Story 77. I was employed at a small company which had about 8 to 12 full-time employees as part of the Kickstart scheme. As part of it, my work had to fill out an employee evaluation of me when my contract was nearing the end, which was to be kept fully confidential between my manager and the scheme. I know this because when my manager sent the form back, I was still accidentally CC fielded into it. But it clearly wasn't meant for my eyes, so I decided to just delete it without reading. Ignorance is bliss, etc. Then a short while later, I got a very panicked message from a colleague asking if I was all right. Yes? Because they just felt so awful for me. Turns out it wasn't me who'd been CC fielded into the email, but the all-staff email instead. Said colleague had read it before realizing what it was and was the one who had to tell management what they'd done, who at that point still hadn't said anything to the horror of my colleague. A good few minutes later, I got pulled into the most awkward virtual meeting with my manager, who was very embarrassed and apologetic. Not how it should have been done. I then admitted that I hadn't actually read the evaluation at all, and she looked super caught out, before very reluctantly giving me the details to my face, instead of glossing over the whole thing as clearly hoped. And that's how I was the very last person in the entire company to learn that they would be letting me go. Story 78. Worked in a company named after one of the Shire counties. It sent out an email informing the entire staff that there was an issue with the phones, and in the title, the Shire had been typed to crepe. Company was absolutely crepe. And so the CEO was convinced it was deliberate and went about trying to sack her. She survived by the skin of her teeth. Story 79. Not an accident, but someone sent around a chain email and it was opened by a teammate with their manager sitting behind them. I just remember being told one of the pictures was two people ducking in the back of a car while their child was sat in the front. No idea who thought it was a good idea sending around an email like that. The person was pulled into an office and they went through the email together, and I would imagine it was so uncomfortable. Story 80. We have a thing of playing with someone's computer if they leave it unlocked for too long. Think searching dumb things, typing up emails, etc. I tend to just leave a sticky note on their PC, lock it, then steal their pen instead. One time someone wrote up a resignation email for a coworker as a joke with insults. Then someone else clicked send. Luckily, our manager is a barrel of laughs and can take a joke, but some people definitely had to be spoken to about it as procedure. Story 81. Once a team leader sent me an email meant for my manager with yearly review feedback saying how much of a I was. I handled it well, changed his opinion of me, and he was kind of right anyway. Story 82. During a time of firing about 50% of staff, the head HR person sent the spreadsheet to a guy who they just fired with everyone's salary and bonus on. Some were on huge bonus structures as well. Story 83. A colleague of my main ME contractor set his autocorrect to change tank to wank. If your whole job is about aircon and water systems, it turns out you send rather a lot of messages with the word tank in them. He didn't notice for about 2 days. Story 84. At my old place, someone once made an unfortunate typo in the subject line of the weekly count summary. Internal comms went bananas, trying to recall it, as it had gone out to the directors. The poor intern who sent it had hit send and immediately gone home and on holiday, and it refused to go into her account to recall it. Of course, this just created something of a Streisand effect as the recipients either hadn't noticed or didn't care, but the groveling email from the head of comms ensured it became a whole thing. One of the directors responded along the lines of, "I was very disappointed opening this email. I had some names I hoped to see on the summary." Story 85. The most embarrassing thing I have done is I emailed someone from our European office with "hi name" and sent it before writing out the rest of the email. Not very embarrassing, but I found it very funny at the time. Another thing that happened isn't embarrassing, but it has definitely broken GDPR laws. We are freight forwarder and have been sent some confidential documents from one of the shipping lines. There was loads of them. I think it happened twice, and I don't think anyone has ever clocked it as they never attempted to recall the emails. But if they did, someone must have been in some deep crap. Story 86. Best one I had was when I was a contractor working for a well-known United Kingdom mobile company. Our company had about 20 staff working here on contract. We all finished work as normal on Friday night. On Monday morning, 8 of us showed up. Next thing we know, we get an email sent to the whole company with a photo of all 12 people outside a mobile manufacturer's offices in Sweden saying, "Wish you were here?" They all up and went to work there without telling anyone. Then there's the usual, someone leaves and emails the company their farewell roast of everyone, announcing the manager who was caught pleasure himself in the toilets, etc. All these messages were recalled before most saw. But we had Blackberries, which, once received, they can't be recalled. Now sending emails company-wide is blocked at Story 87. A colleague of mine at a college sent over some student marks and was basically talking about wanting to alter them a bit to give the group a bit of a better pass rate. He came into the office and couldn't work out why we hadn't received the email yet. He double-checked and realized he'd sent it to another person with the same name, who happened to be the leader of the local council. Story 88. In the early 2000s, I worked for a long-gone airline company. 2 people there had been having a raging affair. The guy was married with kids, the woman's single. She got a new role with the company that involved moving to Australia. The guy wrote her a several thousand-word email professing his love for her, slagging off his wife and kids and begging her to stay, and somehow sent it to an all-company email distribution group. He was fired. She went to Australia, but only lasted 6 months and left too. Story 89. I sent my regional manager a scan of my face once. I was very bored at work on a Saturday morning, so I put my head in the scanner. Later that week, I attached the wrong file to an email. He just replied, "I don't think that's what you meant to send me." Shortly afterwards, I also sent a scan of my passport to a supplier rather than a copy of a delivery note. That taught me to check my attachments more carefully. Story 90. Not me, honest, but an area manager once sent the entire employee population a spreadsheet containing all the current salaries and proposed uplifts for everyone at store management level and above, including bonuses. This did not go down very well. Story 91. I once rushed an email as I was leaving for the day to send to multiple colleagues and spelled my own damn name wrong at the bottom because I was literally on my way out, so just quickly typing. Luckily, either nobody noticed or nobody cared, as it never got mentioned. Story 92, not me, but my mom used to be a teaching assistant / special needs coordinator at a primary school. That place was so incredibly cliquey, and everyone seemed like they were just the worst to each other. They failed a couple of Ofsted inspections due to how many problems it caused. One day, apparently, the heads sent out an email that accidentally contained their crap list of all the staff the people in charge didn't like and what they'd done that wronged them so badly. That week and the month or so after were a ducking mess. I think 1 or 2 people might have left over it too. Story 93. At my old job, once per month, everyone was to fill in a week company surgery with 3 questions about how things were going. As the head chef, I sent my reply with a note about how one person needs extra training and clicked reply to all. I felt terrible. Immediately apologized to my colleague. He was cool with it. And to be fair, bosses should have BCC'd that crap. Story 94. I once sent an email to one of our directors. His name was Alan. Unfortunately, autocorrect or my typing skills had other plans. I accidentally addressed him with a very unfortunate misspelling of his name, and I didn't notice it until he replied. He never mentioned it, which somehow made it even worse. Story 95. Wasn't an email, but an accidental text directly to my boss, which was meant for someone else. Man, boss is such a Karen. This was around 5 years ago now, and it makes my stomach drop thinking about it. My boss was a champ and was a self-confessed Karen, so she wasn't fazed at all. We worked together for like a further 3 years and never had any issues. Story 96. A famous British eye hospital used to have a spreadsheet with each surgeon's private patient earnings on each tab. They'd extract the tab for each person and save that and send it to them. Apart from that one time where the master spreadsheet got sent to everyone by mistake, so everyone saw what everyone else was earning. What is the most embarrassing thing to have happened to you at work? Story 1. I had a tooth fallout during a big meeting with all the higher-ups. I made a joke about the company needing a better dental plan. I got laid off a week later. Story 2. When I worked at a sandwich shop, I often daydreamed during the slow times, early in the morning. I was making a guy a sandwich and thinking about my social life, and instead of finding out the type of cheese I should put on, I asked, "What kind of friends do you want?" It doesn't sound that bad, but it was so damned random, not like calling your teacher mom or something. Who the duck confuses cheese with friend? Worst of all, he answered me. Ones who are kind and fun to be with? Story 3. I'm a waiter. I was serving a family with 2 young children, and I had just dropped off their drinks and was in the process of taking their orders. As I'm taking the father's order, their youngest daughter, maybe 4 years old, gets up from her seat, walks over to me, wraps her arms around my thighs, and kisses me right on the, She then giggled loudly and scampered back into her chair. Her mother just looked at me and said, "She likes you." All I could say was, super salad. Story 4. For the first year at one job, I always used the women's bathroom. I'm a man. It was in a somewhat stylish theater, and the bathrooms were labeled dames and gents. The lettering was vertical, if that makes any difference, so for some reason I thought dames was actually demens, since it was all stylized and whatnot. Alright, I can't ducking explain it. I just did it, okay? Then one day I caught someone giving me a weird look as I went into the bathroom, but wasn't sure why. When I came out, I actually looked at the door, read dames, remembered the gents door, and then my brain kicked in with all the shame and that good stuff. Story 5. One afternoon while waiting tables, I was crazy busy. What appeared to be 2 bald men came in and grabbed a table, and in my rush, I didn't take more than a cursory glance at them before saying, "Hey fellas, I'll be right with you." When I came back to take their order, one of them was sobbing uncontrollably. It turned out to be a man and his wife that was going through chemo. Story 6. I was working the front desk of a hotel. The new manager was due to show up. The owner brought him in, introduced him to me, and as soon as I reached over to shake his hand, the button on my blouse just popped right open. It went okay. We have 3 kids now. Story 7. I used to work in a place that renovated vending machines, and my job was to find all of the different models they had and get measurements for each one. This involved me spending most of my time exploring the deepest parts of the storage warehouse. You know that ridiculously massive warehouse in Indiana Jones? It looked like that, but filled only with vending machines. So I'm taking some measurements far from civilization and I back up to look at the machine. My mind wanders to the fact that I'd been learning how to kick karate style, and suddenly I have a powerful urge to do a kick or two to check out my progress. So I do. I am in the middle of nowhere after all, and I've been working pretty productively. As I'm finishing my last kick for the first and only ducking time this ever happened, my boss appears behind me. He had a random question to ask, so he came and found me. "So, trying out some kung fu there?" Yep. So awkward it hurt. Story 8. My first day at my internship in the HR depth of a big company, my boss came in my cubicle to say hello, and then, very nicely but still, informed me that I had dropped a tampon under my chair. Also, earlier that same day I'd gone to another floor to sign some paperwork, and I was directed to wait in a dark and presumably unoccupied conference room. Turns out it was dark, but not unoccupied. Instead, there was a middle-aged man in a suit crying inside, and that was my first welcome to corporate America. Hey. Story 9. I'm very picky about taking a crap at work. Don't know why a lot of folks consider it free money. For me, however, I've never really enjoyed crapping at work. Well, one day it was unavoidable. The maelstrom of Mexican food and a Fiber One bar the day before had taken its toll, and I knew that we were swiftly approaching Deacon 1. I tried to figure a way to nonchalantly go about it. However, the restrooms are located in places that are near other folks' offices. I work in a small building with 15 employees. The restrooms aren't, shall we say, isolated. I made small talk with the receptionist, then made my way to the restroom, closed the door, concentrated on making my crap escape my bowels as silently as possible. Fail. It sounded like a combination of those clicking noises the Predator makes and a Browning machine gun. I grimaced as I knew I could do nothing, and everyone had to have heard it. I even tried to do the whole coughing while you crap thing to make it seem like it was something else. Gave that idea up pretty quickly. Once I finished, and the room sufficiently smelled like a septic tank, I pranced out of the restroom, made zero eye contact, walked as close to the walls as possible, trying to still be the crap ninja. Yeah, that whole experience was fairly embarrassing. Story 10. I am a secretary. I tripped in a darkened conference room where the people I support were doing a presentation. I fell squarely into the vice president's lap. He said, "Oof," really loudly, and everybody turned around. Story 11. On the way home from the engineering firm I was doing a summer internship at, I was listening to the audiobooks of Harry Potter. When the books reached the battle at the Ministry of Magic at the end of the 5th book, I was stopped at a set of traffic lights. I looked around to see my supervisor in the next lane laughing at me whilst I mimed a wand fight. Story 12. This happened yesterday. My network card on my office computer went bad, and it can't get to it until next week, so I temporarily moved to my boss's old cubicle. That computer obviously doesn't have any of my files, software, permissions, etc., so I had absolutely nothing to do. My colleague and I had talked about my lack of work that day. He sent me a message via internal office. Iman said, "Come to my office when you get a sec." I walked in and said, "I have tons of secs." Every male in the office popped his head up out of the cube and stared at me. Story 13. My first job ever. I worked at a Home Depot type store, and we all had to wear aprons like they do there. I finished ringing someone up and pushed the register drawer closed with my hip. Try to step away from the register. Can't. Awesome. Try to reach back and untie the apron. Can't do that either. So I just lean there all nonchalant, waiting for the next customer so the drawer will open and hoping the building doesn't catch on fire. This old couple comes up and I ring them up, standing awkwardly sideways at the register because I can't turn around. But they pay with a credit card. The drawer didn't open for those. Damn it. The old lady gives me a funny look and says, "Are you stuck in the register?" I told her, "Yeah, don't worry about it." But this sweet old lady wanted help and yells to her husband, who had started to walk away to buy something with cash, because I was trapped in the register. Story 14. I worked in a hookah lounge. A lot of our customers usually spoke Arabic, and on a slow night, these two guys came in and they seriously looked like they spoke Arabic, so I start welcoming them into the lounge in Arabic and telling them about our specials. Once they came into the light and I saw that they were both gingers, I was embarrassed. Gingers don't know Arabic. Story 15. Working in an office filing papers during a time where I had to pleasure like 3 times a day. While at work, I decided to take care of it in the bathroom. Naturally, I put down toilet paper on the seat prior to doing my deed. After finishing, I zipped up and went back to my paper filing. Every who walked by kept looking at me and laughing. I thought they knew somehow, but couldn't figure it out. It ended up being that when I pulled up my pants, I got a long piece of toilet paper stuck in my waist, and it was dragging behind me all day. It was embarrassing, but quite a relief compared to what I thought they were laughing at. Story 16. While sitting at my desk, I tend to cross my feet in a weird 1 foot over the other way. Once, someone came over to speak to me at my cubicle, and as I was rotating my chair to look at them, I forgot to uncross my feet and tripped over myself, falling face first to the ground. So yeah, I tripped on my own 2 feet while sitting down. Story 17. I took a wild poop on my break, wiped, left the bathroom, and felt something on my leg. Go to the bathroom, find a nice-sized melty poop nugget running down the inside of my thigh. Luckily that day, I didn't go commando, and none of it touched my pants. Threw underwear into trash compactor, scrubbed my legs raw with hand soap and paper towel. I was ducking, mortified. Story 18. Not me, but my friend BJ was interviewing for a great job alongside another guy named Nathan. They met the head of the company, who comments to the other guy, "I can't remember the last time we had a Nathan in the office." Well, in an apparent vacuum of thought, my friend asks, totally innocently, and with his sweet smile, "When was the last time you had a BJ in the office?" He did get the job. He does not go by BJ anymore. Story 19. Network dude here. Someone sent me a link. I put on my headphones and clicked on it, but it sounded kind of quiet, so I turned up the volume. It only got a little louder. Then I realized with horror that my headphones were unplugged, and I'd been blasting audio of a woman very suggestively moaning our IP address to the whole office. To this day, I don't know who heard it. Story 20. I work at a modeling agency, and we were working with Junk Sporting Goods for one of their catalogs. The job ended up being a big hassle and a lot of last-minute changes. So one day, feeling kind of frustrated, I yelled in the office, "After this job, we better get free junks for life." My coworkers still haven't let me forget it. Story 21. Hey boss, I think we should follow up with coworker A on her budget. She's spending like crazy and is really selfish when it comes to working out future state. I just did a quick mid-year analysis and she's horrible at managing the finances of her department. We'll need a babysitter for the rest of the year. Go to add my boss in the to section of the email and was thinking the name of coworker A, which led me to type in coworker A's name and hit send without realizing. Story 22. I was at a urinal at work, a hall bathroom that serves several doctor's offices and tech firms on the floor, when my cell phone rang in my pocket. I looked at the caller ID and noticed it was this company calling that I had applied to and really wanted the new job. In a panic, I started to tuck and zip and use the other hand to answer the phone, only to suddenly remember that the toilets automatically flushed, and the flushing sound and the echo would give away the fact that I was in a men's room when I answered the call. I horridly rushed to the door and flung it open, simultaneously saying hello in a non-super reflective environment and far enough away from the flushing so that it was inaudible. It was at this moment I realized my junk was still hanging out of my open fly. Story 23. Not so much embarrassing for me, but definitely awkward. I was a junktail waitress at a comedy club while in college. The seats in the club were set up stadium style, tiered, so I would go up and down the stairs taking orders from the aisles. I should also note that I wore kind of a short cheerleader type skirt. One night I was walking up the stairs taking orders before the show, and a man tried to get my attention by touching me on the arm because I was looking the other way. At the exact moment he went to touch my arm, I walked up a step and his hand went under my skirt and essentially slapped my ass. I turned around and the man was absolutely mortified. I mean mortified. It didn't take me long to realize he had done it by mistake, but I'll never forget the look on his face when he thought he was going to be arrested for smacking a college girl on the ass. Story 24. The Subway that I used to work at had a drive-thru and 2 headsets. We'd set it up so that one person with a headset would take the order and make sandwiches, while the other person would stay silent and ring up the order. Thing is, I don't do silent. I sing while at work. We all did, called it the singing Subway. Well, I was ringing orders one day and doing the dishes in between orders, all the while belting out sex and candy. Thing is, I didn't realize I had bumped the transmit button, so the people in the car outside could hear me. Luckily, they weren't too upset, and even complimented me on my voice. Story 25. So I was selling this bra to a lady, 38F, not a big deal. She pays with a $100 bill. Me, knowing I had almost no change, I say, "Damn, that's a big one." All I meant was, "That is a big bill. Don't know if I have change." So the lady gets all mad and says, "Well, excuse me for having big tits. I died." Story 26. I sat down at my desk to start the day when I heard a few stitches come loose in my pants. Didn't think too much of until I was prancing up and down the office hallway, taking a call on my mobile. Must have been doing it for over 20 minutes when I get a tap on my shoulder by the CEO. "Son, I suggest you get your ass back home and change your pants." My entire backside, only covered by my tightly whites, were on display for a good 20 goddamn minutes. And the only person who had the balls to tell me was the CEO. Story 27. As a corporate communication director, I was in the middle of an important meeting with the company's CEO, a no-nonsense kind of guy, when I happened to cross my legs and noticed that I was wearing 2 different Sescorts, one black and one burgundy, one wingtip, one not. I started to laugh, quietly to myself, at first, then out loud. He wasn't amused. Story 28. Toothpaste is an awesome way to cure a pimple, unless you forget to remove it from your face during your first week of work, giving the impression that instead of a little tiny zit on the side of your nose, you have a suppurating white minty pustule. Story 29. I showed up to work with 2 different Sescorts on, one brown, one black, different heel heights. I wore them all day long since it was too far to go home and change. Story 30. I had a long panel interview for a high-level position I wanted. After 60 minutes of dazzling conversation and answering all their questions, I stood up to shake their hands goodbye. Unfortunately, having your legs crossed for 60 minutes will make one fall asleep. I ended up dragging my numb leg out walking like Igor. Story 31. I was doing some lab testing at my company's headquarters. The lab was wicked loud. Lots of servers, so huge air handling. You had to walk through a small office to access the lab. The office had about 10 people in it and was dead quiet. So I get up to go to the restroom, and just as I open the door, the small office, my coworker asked me where I'm going. After being in that lab for a couple hours, my voice was on screaming mode. Basically, I opened the door to the office and screamed, "I gotta take a piss." I walked back in the lab and held it. Story 32. I spilled gasoline on me when I went to fill up my tank at lunch. No time to go home, but when I got back to work, I washed up as well as I could in the bathroom. I thought I could still smell gasoline, but was not sure if it was just me. When I got back to my desk, I needed some help with a work matter, so a supervisor was at my desk. I wanted to see if anyone else could smell the gasoline, so what I meant to say to her was, "Can you smell that I spilled gasoline on me earlier?" What I said instead was, "Can you smell that I got gas?" I was so mortified I didn't know what to do. I just kind of sat there for like 5 seconds. She didn't respond, just kind of walked away. Story 33. I was a seasonal driver helper for UPS during Christmas time years ago. Because the drivers were generous and made 27 hours while I made $8.50, they would often offer to fill me up with drinks and snacks to make the day seem less long. Typically, I'd start around noon and finish out the day, but on this particular day, I met up with the guy in the morning and he had already picked out things for me to munch on. Problem is, I wasn't thinking. Ever since I could remember, eating too much too early in the day gives me painful midday bloats and gas. Around midday, of course, along came the bloat. He said he got a bonus if he came back to the warehouse before a certain time, so he didn't want to make any stops as payment for my snacks. I was so puffed up my stomach was distended and I was in pain, and I had to jump off the truck and run back and forth up the driveways to the doorsteps. Finally, at night, with my teeth clenched, I notice it's gotten windier, and the door on my side is always open. He's gone in the back to sort boxes by address and figure I have my chance. I unloaded such a large volume of trap gas so suddenly through such a relatively small space that I thought I might have actually torn my asshole and started to bleed. Cue smell of reclaimed water, plus rotten eggs, plus fermentation of Dr. Pepper, Twizzlers, and crap. And the wind dying, and him coming back to the front. "Did you just crap your pants?" Both honestly and dishonestly, I exclaimed, "No, why?" "Because of the crap smell." "I don't know what..." And then I actually reached the limits of nasal absorption on my own fragrance and projectile vomited on my lap, the seats, the floor under the dash, and thanks to a high mucus content, the part of the street directly underneath us. After derision, laughter, and tears, and cleaning up while mobile, we finished the night, and I worked there for another month, till Christmas Day. Packages delivered rain, shine, or something else entirely. Story 34. I was young, trying to act smart and all that, and I pronounced epitome phonically, and everyone caught it. I saw the looks. Funnily enough, I heard epitome pronounced correctly on TV later that night and looked it up. Never have I been so embarrassed. I had only ever read the word, and I'm fairly well read, so I never caught it before. I still turn red thinking about it. Story 35. A few years back, a lady with her teenage daughter walked into our shop. I hear the door open, so I turn around to ask if there was something I could do for them. The teenage girl saw me and said, "Ew, you are so gross looking." The mom then replied with, "Gross." My boss came around the corner and told me to go in the back where they couldn't see me. Story 36. While sitting in my cubicle one day, I felt a horribly uncomfortable fart building. I attempted to get up and walk to the ladies' restroom in time to pass my gas in peace, but nope. Just let out a long, clearly audible fart as I dashed past my boss's office in embarrassed panic. He made a fart joke later in the day, too. He knew. Story 37. I had just gotten a tattoo on my bicep a few years ago and had to lotion it every few hours for the first week to keep it from drying out. During that week, I would run to the bathroom every few hours with a bottle of Cure. I basically looked like I was chronically pleasure at work. Story 38. My first week and first job at Chick-fil-A, I was learning how to make tea and lemonade. At my store, we made 8 gallons of each at a time. Since this is in Georgia, you make unsweetened sweet tea. You line up 8 buckets on the counter, boil enough water for each, and put in the tea bags. For the containers intended to be unsweetened tea, you stop at this step. But for sweet tea, you put the measured amount of sugar in the containers. After you finish all of this, you throw them in the fridge and wait for them to be ready. I was shown all of this by my supervisor, and they said to do the same thing for the lemonade, except instead of tea bags, you put in the lemon juice. He put 2 containers of sugar in front of me and told me to make regular lemonade and diet lemon. Then he left. So I followed the same steps I used for the tea. Put in water, lemon juice, and sugar for regular. For the diet lemonade, I put in water, lemon juice, and I stopped at that step. Done. I didn't find out later that one of the sugar containers he gave me was equal sweetener. I guess he figured I was smart enough for figure it out. He was wrong. We had a lot of returned diluted lemon juice the next day. Story 39. Actually, this happened a couple weeks ago. I've gained a significant amount of weight the last couple years, and while on my way back inside from a 4 p.m. cigarette break, my best friend says to me, "Do you have a patch on the back of your pants?" I say, "No, why?" and feel the back of my pants. While I do this, she says, "There's something bright pink. It looks like a patch." I cut her off immediately, announcing that it was a rip. It was 6 inches long, vertically right next to my back left pocket. I don't know how long it had been there. I made errands for lunch to Rite Aid and Dunkin' Donuts, walked around the building a few times. All the while, my pink with white polka dot undies were being shown to the world. Everyone found out and laughed at my expense. Story 40. I was wearing a knit poncho to the office. That is embarrassment number 1. Number 2 is that in a sugar rush, I flipped the front of it over my head and did a little silly dance. But the clincher, number 3, is that my desk neighbor clandestinely filmed it so that a few seconds of silliness could become an endless feedback loop of mortification. Story 41. My first job was a bagger at my local grocery store. During my first week, I had the pleasure of bagging the boss's groceries. My boss was kind of soft-spoken, so he came over to me and muttered something about me going and putting the groceries in that purple truck outside while he finished up a few things in his office. Now, I could have sworn I heard him say purple truck, and as rare of a color that is, what do you think I saw when I got outside? A bright-ass purple truck. Being new and not knowing what the boss drove, I walked right up to this truck, opened the door. It was unlocked, furthering my belief that this was the boss's truck, and set the groceries inside. I walked back into the store, feeling pretty good about myself. About 10 minutes later, my boss came up to me asking me where I put his groceries. I responded, "I put them in the purple truck like he asked me to." He goes all white in the face and says, "No, I told you to put them in the black truck." So basically, I gave my boss's groceries away during my first week because of the most unfortunate of misunderstandings and strokes of bad luck I've ever experienced. Story 42. I work in a small IT room for a healthcare company. I have my own little section in the corner of the room to do as I please. One normal day, I was just sitting here, browsing Reddit, when I needed to let out a little poot. Just a tiny fart. It wasn't even a struggle. I relaxed my muscles and let it loose. But to my absolute horror, I quickly realized I'd opened the floodgates to something unexpected, and out starts pouring this hot, sticky poo juice. It wasn't something I could hide or go clean up in the bathroom. It was everywhere. I could feel it seeping into the cloth of my pants. I didn't know what to do. I was panicking for about 2 minutes before I just said, "Duck it," apologized to my coworker for having to leave early, and drove home, sitting on my crafty ass for about 15 minutes until I could finish up and take a shower. Story 43. I used to be a receptionist for a huge and very stuffy Fortune 50 company. There was once an after-hours VIP meeting taking place in my lobby work area, as it was more comfortable. I walked into this room of 30 nationwide corporate presidents and VPS, saw someone I thought I knew and called, "Hey, Jeffrey, how are you?" Every face turned, including the one that wasn't Jeffrey. I pretended I had a Bluetooth on, turning my head and pointing at my bare ear, and shrugging apologetically at everyone. Not a big deal, but when the upper echelon only notices you when they need something or you duck up, you want to do as little of the latter as possible. Story 44. We were dedicating a new building on our campus, and I was helping to organize the ribbon-cutting event. There was a stage and music, and we had those air dancers on either side of the stage to add to the celebratory ambiance. The building was named for a wonderfully old, 85 to 90, influential woman who donated most of the money for the building, and she was there to cut the ribbon. As she stood up to be recognized, a huge gust of wind blew one of those air dancers down and knocked the poor old philanthropist on her butt on the stage. Story 45. I worked from home for a long time. My company didn't see much need for programmers to be in office, since we wouldn't get up from our desks and communicate with Mumble/Skype/Ventrilo anyway. So I got used to being alone or having my girlfriend as the only other person in the house. Well, I have a bad habit of whistling if I'm listening to music and working. Normally I sing, but I can't type code and remember lyrics at the same time, so I just whistle. Eventually, I got to be a pretty important manager and consultant on a large project and had to be in the office in person to make very fast updates to the program. I was just typing away on my first day back with my headphones on, and I was apparently whistling for like 3 hours straight in my own little world. I got an email from HR asking me to stop whistling at work. The worst part was, I was listening to a lot of Lady Gaga that day. Every woman in my office recognized at least Bad Romance. I wish I sucked more at whistling sometimes. Story 46. Last week, I got an office-wide email concerning an ice cream party social for the building with the chance to win concert ticket. I'm pretty tight with the guy who sent it to me, so I immediately send back, verbatim, "Oh, hells yeah, I'm gonna get me some Lil Wayne tickets." I accidentally had clicked reply all. Story 47. I had hooked up with a guy the night before, and was too drunk to tell him not to give me a love bite. The next morning, I saw with horror a throbbing swollen on my neck. I worked as a server for banquets, and you had to tie your hair in a tight ponytail. I slapped makeup on it and prayed no one would notice. While I was walking around picking up empty glasses, some old guy inched towards me and asked, in a creepy, come-hither voice, if I had fun with my boyfriend the night before. I blushed violently and swiftly walked away. Story 48. I had just got hired in at my current position. The weekend before my first day of work, I had quite a few drinks. I was going down the stairs a little too fast and my feet went out from under me. The fall broke my tailbone. I spent the first 2 months of my career with an orange-ass donut. Story 49. When I was 20, just under the drinking age, I had just gotten my first decent real job at a law firm. It was my second day, and the firm was having a Christmas party. They all met in the boardroom with the huge ducking table in it. I was underage and nervous, but thought it would be okay if I grabbed a beer. I went to sit down with my freshly opened Heineken when I realized every seat at the table was taken up by lawyers and secretaries already, and I had to sit at the head of the table. I sat down, put my beer on the table, and reached for some popcorn, promptly spilling my not even sipped beer all over the table, causing everyone to sprawl out, and the entire room laughed at me. Another story is that one of these lawyers turned out to be a pretty cool guy, I'd say mid-30s, and one day, months later, he invited me to a concert. I met him at the show, and he started buying me beers. I was now freshly 21 and just getting used to drinking in public places. His client/friend ended up coming along too. So now it was the three of us, and we quickly discovered that I shared a last name with his client, and we all started having a great time. When the show ended, they took me to a bar and told me to get whatever I wanted. We had already been drinking the whole time, so I just got a Bud Light. The place was packed, and I was standing at the bar talking to my new friend, the lawyer's client, and I promptly, out of nowhere, vomited all over his arm and the bar. We ran to the bathroom, and he was cooler about it than I could ever imagine someone being. He was all, "Hey, no problem, man. Don't worry about it. Let's just get out of this place." We go out to pay the tab, and the bartender starts screaming at him for having puked. I tried to defend him without blowing up my own spot. So I yelled to the bartender, "He didn't puke. He got puked on." The bartender responded, "Well, if you saw it, then who puked?" I started stammering, and my freshly puked on new friend turned to me and said, "Why don't you just go outside and I'll take care of this?" So I went outside and promptly got the duck out of there. The lawyer was cool about it, but certainly never let me live it down. Story 50. I chew on pens. I'll chew the stock on one all the way down to the point. I have done it all my life and have revolted coworkers and bosses throughout my working career by leaving community writing implements looking like you trying to fish something out of a running garbage disposal with them. The best part is the cap, though, which I will put entirely in my mouth and chew to oblivion. Unfortunately, on a particularly quiet workday, I had a chunk of chewed-up pen cap in my mouth, and it somehow slipped down into my windpipe. Though I wasn't completely choking, I got a little panicky and started making some of the most grotesque gurgling and hacking sounds in order to dislodge it from my throat. This went on for a good minute or so, and when I couldn't answer the people inquiring through the cubicle walls if I was all right, they came running to my aid. 4 or 5 turned the corner just in time to see me simultaneously vomit up my lunch and chewed up hunk of pen cap all over my desk and clothes. They still had no idea whether I was all right, and despite their revulsion, kept pressing me for an explanation. I accidentally swallowed a pen cap. I preferred their moment of revolted concern over the years of eye-watering laughter every time the story came up in various meetings, get-togethers, and lunch outings throughout my time there. Story 51. I cost my boss $600. I worked at a gas station for a while, and my boss said that when he wasn't there, I was the boss and in charge. Duck, yeah. So when I got a phone call asking for the boss, of course I said that I was the boss. Bad idea. It just so happened that it was a man with a really difficult to understand Indian accent. I couldn't really understand him, so I just kept saying yes, sure, fine, which I probably shouldn't have done. Anyway, 8 months later, my boss gets a phone call saying he owes $600 for 8 months of medical insurance he signed up for. As soon as he asked if I ever answered the phone to some Indian salesman, I knew I was ducked. He didn't fire me or charge me $600, but I did get Karen'd at, and he never let it go. Still talks about it. Story 52. I had just gotten my first office job, 20 years old, suffering from horrible anxiety. I'd been there for 2 weeks, and me, my supervisor, and another supervisor were headed to a meeting in a different building. The building I work in has stairs outside of the building, and we were going down them. It had rained earlier that day. I was wearing flip-flops and trying to keep up with them as they were walking pretty fast. Next thing you know, I'm sliding down the stairs on my ass. For some reason, I yelled out, "Oh man," as it happened. They helped me up and asked me if I was okay. I said yes, even though I was mortified. Later on during the meeting, I realized I had skinned up my elbow by finding my blood on someone's paperwork in their office. So I covered it up with other paperwork. Story 53. Similar incident for me. I was sitting at my desk, and upon looking at the clock, I realized I was late for a meeting. I hoofed it to the conference room and slowly opened the door only to be greeted by 20 pairs of eyes. I walked softly to an empty seat beside my friend/coworker. As I gingerly sat down in the seat, thinking it would minimize my visibility, I let out a huge fart. Everyone in the room snapped their heads in my direction. Petrified, I acted instinctively and pointed to my buddy while shaking my head in disgust. He looked at me shocked. A few minutes later, I leaned over and whispered to him, "You don't know this, but you have to fart again." He replied, "Don't talk to me. You are shunned." He was angry with me for some time. Story 54, a light. So, back in the day, I used to work at a rural Staples store as their sole computer fixer guy. I also trained in martial arts. Yes, relevant. They had set up shop in literally a closet that they put shelves and ceiling to floor. Bunch of monitors/keyboards for desktops, some shelf space for laptops, and a big switch. Well, being one of the only repair shops in this small town, we were always swamped. And me being the only one there to fix them, I often had computers backed up everywhere. One day, I had the bottom 2 shelves filled with about 8 laptops and was working on one on the left top. Then decided to go full say-ma, kind of a deeper version of this to reach the bottom right one. Pants ducking, explode everywhere. Ass hanging out in this closet. Take off my work shirt, announce to my manager that I was leaving, walk out the door, go to the nearest pants store, buy pants. Story 55. The last job interview I had was for a tech position on a college campus. I'd already worked another tech job at this campus and had heard that one of the people on the interview board was a new hire named Altaf. I went into the interview and I had met everyone but Altaf. My old boss said, "I'm not sure you've met. This is," and I answered, "Altaf." The room got quiet. My old boss said, "No, this is Mahmoud." I realized I just assumed it was Altaf because they were both Indian. Story 56. I worked at a water park when I was 17. After work, we could hang out and go down the water slides with the rest of the employees if we decided we wanted to throw a party. I was nervous to go down the slide, and all of my coworkers knew I pretty much hated it, as I was painfully shy and scared of heights. They finally all started cheering for me to try it out, so with newfound bravery, I went down the slide. I'm loving every minute of it, until I noticed everyone at the bottom of the slide had a horrified look on their face. I screamed, "What?" when my boss looked upward and pointed. I turned around and saw that the 60-plus-year-old pool engineer and general grandpa figure at the park had decided to slide down with me and was coming down after me fast. He knew better than to do more than one person at a time on the slide. Knowing it was too late, I braced for collision. Our bodies met, his wrinkly, mine young, with a terrible force. I, disoriented and shocked, splashed around to gain my composure at the bottom of the slide, while he sat there quite comfortably with the biggest smile on his face, while the rest of us youngsters looked on in shock and horror. While I struggled to plant my hands at the bottom of the slide to get up, I accidentally cupped his balls. I accidentally cupped his old man balls, while he sat there watching and grinning, and the rest of the staff watched. For the rest of the summer, the sign for me would be the sign of one cupping one's balls. I lost some of my innocence that day. Story 57. I was working the register at my job. I had accidentally thrown away an important receipt, so I was squatting by the trash can, digging through it, looking for that one receipt out of hundreds. No one was around at the time, so I started singing the song Popular from the musical Wicked. I was about done with the song when I looked up and saw 2 men, who had obviously been standing there a while, staring at me from over the counter, waiting for me to assist them. Basically, I was squatting, digging through trash, singing an embarrassing song, unaware 2 men were watching me. Story 58. I was working as a network engineer for a large company that had recently done some major remodeling. They had converted several offices into a new executive boardroom and needed me to wire up a whole teleconference setup in there. So along one wall of the room was a long counter with cabinets and doors underneath. My hardware finally shows up and I go in there to hang the 2 58-inch LCDs and hook up all the wiring and gear. To reach the Ethernet and phone ports, I have to crawl inside of the cabinets with a flashlight. These cabinets have a louvered venting on them for airflow. So I end up staying inside there for a fair bit and don't notice it's time for lunch. I hear a door open and then lock. I hear steps go past me to the other door and lock it. And then the lights go off. For some reason, I'm now frozen in time, wondering what the fuck is going on. I start smelling a women's perfume, and then I start to hear a high-pitched buzzing sound. So I peek as best I could out through the vents on the cabinet door, and I'm about eye level with a strange glowing sex toy only about 6 feet away. I then realize that it's the CFO of the company, because she is the only woman at the company that tips the scales at 400 pounds of us. I am scared to death. This woman makes tough guys cry. She's such a Karen. Her cell rings and she turns off her toy and answers. It ends up being my boss, and he's wondering where I've been for so long. He rarely ever talks to me, preferring to email everything for records. She invites my boss to come down to the conference room to look over my fine handiwork on the teleconference system. she unlocks the doors. Any second my boss is going to come down here and open up the doors and expose me to her and her pleasure at lunch. In the end, he doesn't. Just looks at the big screens and says, "They look nice," and leaves to look for me again. She stays a little longer and then leaves. So I climb out and I'm just getting ready to walk out of the room when she walks back in, nearly making me piss my pants. She mentions to me that my boss was looking for me. I make up a lame excuse about being out in the shop and not having my phone on me. She asks how I got in the conference room without her seeing me. I tell her I came in just a minute ago from the back door. She tells me she had locked it. Thank God that I have my company-wide master keys on me, and I tell her I must have not noticed when I unlocked the door. She looks at me sideways and lets it go. Closest I have ever come to being mortified, embarrassed, and fired in my entire life. Story 59. I was giving a presentation to a room of about 45 people. I went on Google Images to show an image of something and ended up clicking on the picture of a junk. Thought it was a finger. Story 60. This little trifecta happened to me today. I went to visit a potential customer today. She turned out to be very nice and thoroughly didn't deserve what I put her through. Unfortunately, I've got bronchitis and a suitably horrific cough, and I've generally been a bit under the weather recently because of it. So I'm a little sweaty as the meeting starts. Over lunch with the prospective customer, I find myself telling a story that revolved around doing acid with a buddy when I was younger. I'm thinking, this can't be advisable, but I can't seem to stop myself. Then, shortly after lunch, as we're working together, I have the worst coughing fit of my life. Each set lasts about 10 seconds, and I'm just completely unable to inhale until I'm clawing for breath. Then, I have to desperately try to compose myself and restore a little dignity, only to lapse into another set. This happens 3 or 4 times until I'm red-faced and mortified. I apologize and continue with the meeting because what else can I do? Then, as I'm leaving and shaking her hand, I fart loudly. Not the best first impression I've ever given. Story 61. I worked in a kitchen with 2 other cooks and had a mistake sandwich on the cutting board. It had mayo on it when it wasn't supposed to, so not wanting it to go to waste, I pointed at it. But to everyone else, including the 4 waitresses and owner that were also in the kitchen at the time, it looked like I was pointing at my crotch, and I hollered, "Does anybody want to eat this?" They all looked mortified at first, then burst out laughing. I still haven't lived it down. Story 62. I had a kind of alpha male boss who was bald, worked out a lot, and ate a lot of meat. One day, I overheard him say to someone who had just shaved his head, "Put on some weight, and you'll look just like me." Several weeks later, I couldn't delete a page I accidentally made on our project wiki, so I asked him how. He said, "You need to become me," meaning you need admin privileges, to which I replied, "Well, then I'm going to have to put on some weight." The rest of the team unleashed an ooh, and I felt very stupid. Story 63. I wrote a chapter for an erotic novel I was writing. I had just started, so I was still fairly new at it. I had also just started my new job, and I typed it up on the computer at work. I printed it at work and forgot all about it. A year and a half later, my boss brought it upon me. He had been keeping it in his desk the whole time. I was mortified, but he didn't care. He was like, "Just wanted you to know that I know for a fact you aren't a good girl," then left it at that. I don't work there anymore, and he wouldn't give it back to me. I still think about it to this day sometimes, and I get so embarrassing just thinking about it. Story 64. I was walking toward a group of friends/coworkers and just let out a fart. Not a stinking one, but I just tried to play it off that I tripped on the carpet. Didn't work. Very embarrassed and never brought it up again. There were 2 girls in the group of 5. If it were just guys, I wouldn't have cared. Story 65. I got up late one morning and threw on a skirt that my friend had given me. It was long and black, embroidered with small roses, and it was pretty sheer. However, I didn't realize exactly that it was sheer, as I lived in a crappy basement apartment with crappy lighting, and I was in a rush. Oh, plus it was laundry day, so I had only a trashy pair of underwear that had Angel spelled out in sequins. I had a great day. I got coffee for free, people were holding doors for me, going out of their way to be nice. I was rushing through the entire day because I work at a college and it was days before the start of the fall semester. I work in a small office and it seemed like I was in the crap house for some reason that day, but I couldn't figure it out, and I was so busy all day long. No one said anything to me about it all day. I went outside for a cigarette after I ate at my desk. I was reading something and the light reflecting off the tacky crystals on trashy underwear caught my eye. I was mortified. I had assumed that because the skirt had 2 layers, that the inner layer was opaque. Suddenly, my entire day made sense. I'd never gotten free coffee before. This is why no one in the office is looking me in the eye. I went in and I figured I had to own up to it. There was only my one coworker left, and I told her how I just realized that my skirt was sheer and I was so embarrassed. She said that she thought I had known. It was so humiliating. I worked the rest of the day with a scarf wrapped around my waist. Story 66. About 2 years ago, I interned at JP Morgan, and I sat right outside the office of a really good-looking managing director. He would stop by my desk on the way in and talk to me, and I would get really shy and shaky, but on the inside, I was elated. One day, a big order of stuff came in for the pantry, and since it was right around the corner from my desk, they put some of it outside of the pantry door and some of it outside of my cubicle. One of the boxes fell right outside of the cubicle, and I tripped over it. I went stumbling into the boxes in front of the pantry, making a big mess and a lot of noise. The MD came out of his office, while everyone else who heard it came running over, saw me covered in powdered milk and coffee grounds and shouted, "Touchdown!" We dated a little bit after that, but the amount of anxiety I went through before we dated was very high. Story 67. Not me, but an old teacher of mine, and it was embarrassing for them, so I'll roll with this. Basically, me and my friend were in a product design class, and we were looking at some guitar tabs on the net. The teacher was out of the room at the time, so we decided to print them off. However, as it always happens, just as we hit print, he walked back in. He also walked right by the printer and saw the tabs coming out. Now, for anyone who's never seen tabs, it's basically a load of hyphens and numbers to indicate strings and frets to be played on guitar. However, somehow in his head, it looked very wrong. He actually came up to us and asked us about it, saying, "It looks like some kind of printer binary, right?" We laughed a lot about this later, but at the time, we were just kinds not wanting to get in trouble, so we just shrugged it off. The teacher ended up calling the IT manager down to our classroom to show him. The IT guy then pointed out it said chorus, hallway down the page, and told him what it was loud enough for the whole class to notice. Luckily for us, he was too embarrassed to look at the printing history. Story 68. I'm sure there are going to be more than a few forgot to mute stories, so here's mine. I was on a conference call that started at 4:45 p.m. for some silly reason. A status call for a project that everyone is invited to, but nobody except for a few people really need to be there. And someone stopped by my desk at 5 p.m. end of the workday to see if I was leaving to take the train. Forgot phone wasn't muted and said, if they would ducking wrap it up, who schedules a call at 4:45 anyway? The call went silent for a second, then resumed again, so I figured I was in the clear. Someone on the call later told me they were pretty sure what they heard, but weren't positive. Story 69. I was an intern whose office was the conference table in the middle of the engineering cube. A college sent an email attachment related to the project we had been working on, or so I thought. When I opened the file, my PC blasted out repeatedly. "Hey everybody, I'm looking at adult film over here." Story 70. I worked for a high street mobile cell phone retailer in the north of England just after finishing university in order to pay bills while I looked for a job in my primary field. I was dealing with a customer and I needed her surname for the paperwork I was doing. I asked, "What's your surname?" She promptly told me her name and I noted it down. A few seconds later, she exclaimed, "It's C-O-X." I think you can imagine how I had spelt her name. Sadly, it was the first connotation that came to mind. Story 71. At school, actually, 7th grade science class. I'm at the point where my eyesight is going bad, but I don't realize it yet. I'm sitting near the back of the class, squinting at the board. It takes me a few minutes to read everything, seeing as I have to figure it out one word at a time. This extremely hot girl, out of the blue, turns around and announces to the currently very quiet class that, "I know that you like me, but could you not stare? It's kind of creepy," or something along those lines. The entire class turns to look at me. I'm so surprised/intimidated that I can't find the words to explain that I was looking at the board and instead just sit there and blush. Story 72. It was my first month at a sales job. I hit some arbitrary milestone and was rewarded with a gift certificate to see a movie. Excited, I emailed my girlfriend to tell her about it and ask her if she wanted to go to a movie with me. Accidentally sent it to my manager, F, instead. She thought it would be funny to send the email out to the entire company and say it's not appropriate to ask your manager out. It was kind of funny, but I still catch crap about it today. I triple check emails before I send them now. Story 73. I dropped a full pitcher of beer on a lady's head. She was in a wheelchair. I felt even more ducking horrible when her two sons just burst out laughing. Story 74. Not me. Worked in a very large open office, maybe 200 people. My friend had just quit smoking and got very agitated easily, programmer, and had his headphones on. I was talking to his boss one day when my programmer friend yelled out at his computer, each word louder than the last, "Mother ducking Karen." His boss quietly said, "Excuse me," and went over to talk to him. Story 75. I'm a waitress, and on my second terror-filled day, I spilt a pint of beer on a baby. The parents were actually pretty cool with it and just joked that the kid would sleep soundly tonight, but boy, I thought the earth would swallow me up. I now run the restaurant, and I'm pretty good at my job considering it was just a part-time stint to get me through university. Happy ending, I guess. Not for the baby, though. I bet that child had one hell of a hangover. Story 76. I was telling one of my coworkers about a South Park episode I'd watched the night before. The one where Cartman pretends to have Tourette's. Trying to be funny, I started impersonating him and loudly repeated one of his offensive lines from the show. And that's when I noticed a customer standing right on the other side of the counter. Time froze. My brain immediately caught up with my mouth and I realized How bad that must have sounded completely out of context. Thankfully, the guy was pretty chill about it, but I've never been more embarrassed in my life. Story 77. Hopefully I can convey this well enough, because it truly was a horrible/awesome moment. I used to work at a Tim Hortons coffee shop on drive-thru. I was feeling sick, so I asked my supervisor for some Gravol. She gave me 2 pills, and I assumed that was proper dosage. Hadn't had Gravol since I was really young. Within 10 or so minutes, I feel like I'm tripping the duck out. My depth perception is all skewed, and I feel floaty. It was actually kind of neat for a while, then it all went sour, and I just wanted to go sleep and get away from hellish, Gravol-stoned reality. Anyways, I'm on drive-thru window, and in the passenger seat, I was dead sure there was a dog sitting on the seat. As I was giving the woman her order, I finally did a full-on look/stare at the dog, only to realize it was a black dude with sunglasses who was staring directly at me with a confused/angry look on his face. They speed off. I howl with laughter at myself. Story 78. I was at work and I had just shaved off my goatee that morning. One of the directors happened to be in my office and said, "Hey, you shaved." For whatever reason, I replied, "I just want to be more like you." Even before the awkward set in, I knew. It was like throwing the awkward grenade and just waiting for the fuse to ignite. Story 79. Not embarrassing to me, but whatever, the day after we came back from 2 days of team building in the country. One of the temps, 20-year-old guy, had taken pictures with his personal camera. The boss, 60-year-old lady, asks if he can dump them to the common drive so we can use them in the upcoming newsletter. And he does. Then everybody goes to lunch. I come back early, decide to check out his pictures. Turns out, he'd forgotten that, for some reason, during the night of the team building thing, he'd gotten the urge to take pictures of himself naked in his room's mirror. The red-headed wiener is forever burned onto my retina. I had no idea what to do. Would the guy rather be embarrassed by me or by the boss? Or would he suddenly remember and delete them in time? So I just left them there and waited. All I know is that he looked pretty bummed out for the rest of the day. Story 80. A coworker had taken a strong dose of codeine for the very first time, and as a pretty decent Muslim girl had never gotten drunk, taken substances, or experienced anything quite like the trip she was taking. So she starts weirding out, and we start to play along. My boss pops a paper cup on his head and doing Tommy Cooper impressions, and I'm sticking my thumbs in my ears and waving hand ears at her while playing some trance music. Then the CEO pops his head around the corner. "I don't think there's anyone in here who can help me," he says and leaves. It is never mentioned again. Although we are in a completely separate building to the rest of the company now. Just us, on our own, popping codeine. Story 81. So I was coming out of the bathroom and walking to the vending machine to get a soda. A very, very attractive female employee was in line ahead of me. She turned around, looked at me with a disgusted sneer, and quickly walked away. I was dumbfounded until I realized my belt wasn't buckled. Story 82. In the Navy, basic training in a shore base in Hampshire. Had a bath at the end of a hard day and forgot to lock the door and got walked in having a quick fap in the bath. Thinking about it, I should have just stared for 10 seconds and finished like a boss. Story 83. I am a network architect. I was on an online net meeting sharing my desktop with 10 older networking gurus explaining my solutions doc. While I am waiting for them to discuss, I go re-register my domain on bigdaddy.com. All of them gasp on the phone. I am horrified, as most of you should have already caught on. It's a adult site, Story 84, while working in a coffee shop. Resident at it was seriously bothering this poor blind man, basically grabbed him and hauled him across the street and then demanded money for helping him. It was a pretty horrific scene, and not a soul did a thing about it, even when he came into the shop to get coffee. I placed myself between her and blind man and told her to leave. After a fairly furious conversation, the addict hauled off and punched me. Twice. Took all my strength to not hit her back or grab her scrawny neck and toss her out the door. I called the police to try and scare her off. She proceeded to go to each customer in the store and beg for money. I followed, begging people to not give her anything and asking her to leave. She gets to one man and asks him for $1. The fool reaches into his pocket and pulls one out. I ask him not to give it to her. Asshole stands up and begins to scream at me for telling him what to do. Stupid crap that showed he was oblivious to her harassment of the blind man and the fact that she had punched me, despite being seated 15 feet away from the entire debacle. Addict takes $1 and leaves. Dude leaves. I go outside and smoke a cigarette and contemplate becoming a hermit. Cops show up an hour after my 911 call. First thing the cop asks me, "Is she still here?" I say no. Cops walk out of shop. Most humiliating day ever. Story 85. One time I came into work and I was walking around all day and I could see people smiling when I walked past. About halfway through the day, one of the people took pity on me and told me that I had a sock hanging out the back of my trousers, making it look like I had a tail. I have lots of clothes-related work problems. One time I felt this odd budge in my trouser leg while sitting at my desk. I pushed it out, and it was my boxers from the day before. Story 86. I was waitressing and told a man at my table, "That's nice of you to take your mother out to eat for Mother's Day." He replied with, "This is my wife." Ouch. Needless to say, I didn't get a tip, and I've never made that mistake again. Same job, different day. I was wearing one of those front clasp bras, and the snap broke mid-shift during the busy hour. Spent 20 minutes in the bathroom with my coworker and shift leader trying to fix it. We ended up stapling it together. Story 87. I was working at a big movie theater when I was 17 years old, and on this particular busy night, I brought out one of those 50-pound bags of popcorn kettle. Ground was slippery behind the counter, and I slipped in the classic cartoonish fashion, and the bag of popcorn broke open everywhere. Everyone laughed, and my ass was bruised, literally. Story 88. I went into the handicapped bathroom because I was really sweaty and wanted to take off all my clothes to cool down. Unfortunately, I forgot to lock the door, and my coworker walked in to see me bare-ass naked in front of the mirror. I said nothing because I was so shocked she just said sorry and left. I have no idea what she thinks she saw here. Story 89. It was my first day working at a hospital. It was in food service, and there were lots of doors that led out of the building, but they locked behind. To go into the building, you had to go all the way around to the front of the hospital. I was leaving for the night and exiting through one of these locking doors. I was holding my purse by the strap instead of over my shoulder, and as I walked through the doorway, the strap caught on an inside door, pulling the door shut behind me. My purse strap was hooked inside. My purse was outside. It was 10 p.m. I stood there wondering what to do. I knocked on the door. I tried to break the strap. Finally, after what felt like forever, a nurse happened by. She watched my stuff while I ran around and through the building. I felt like a total Story 90. Crap myself. Not just myself, but all over the bathroom as well. Ditched the underwear in the garbage, left the mess covering walls, floor, etc. Casually walked up to my boss to tell him I did not feel well and went home. Never admitted a thing. Story 91. My first job was bussing tables at Red Robin. It was crazy busy one night, and I was busting my ass, rushing back to the dish that I didn't notice a small child running in front of me. I then proceeded to boot said child about a foot or so in front of me. I was mortified. Luckily, his mom didn't scream at me and instead apologized to me. I obviously pleaded forgiveness, but yeah, that was pretty embarrassing. Story 92. Back when I worked at a grocery store stocking shelves, there was an extremely effeminate young man with a high voice and very long hair who worked on registers. One day on a routine trip to the bathroom, I opened the door to enter, saw him standing at the sink, and immediately thought that I had entered the women's bathroom by mistake. It wouldn't have been a big deal if I simply turned around and walked away, but instead I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought this was the men's room," or something like that. I then turned around, closed the door, and saw that it was in fact the men's room door. I ran away, even though I really needed to use the bathroom, and avoided him for the next year or two until whichever one of us quit first. Story 93. We had a potluck lunch every year. I pooled my money with several other people to get a giant sub from a great deli in the area. I chipped my tooth in half, biting into the baguette roll. I went outside to consider my option. A girl I had a crush on happened to be out there and started talking to me. I basically didn't talk at all and kept my hand over my mouth when I did. Story 94. Last summer, I worked as a summer intern for a company, and one of my tasks was to create a PowerPoint presentation for our division meeting that would introduce the new employees. So once I had pictures of everyone, I imported it into PowerPoint. But PowerPoint would open up the pictures using the actual size, and I had to manually resize them by dragging the image. Because there were many new employees and a ton of pictures to resize, it became a mindless task. Import, resize, import, resize. So in the middle of all of this, I get a call, and it turns out that it had to install something on my computer that I had requested before. They asked me if they can get remote access, and I agree. I wasn't really paying attention at this point, but the guy on the phone was like, and then I noticed that a woman's chest covers my entire monitor. These were huge pictures, by the way, so really, it was just boobs. I guess I had just imported a picture and hadn't resized it yet. The guy was so confused, and then I had to explain my PPT presentation. It was super awkward, especially because I'm a girl, and the girl whose boobs I had covering my entire screen was a very attractive coworker, and she was definitely well endowed. Story 95. Nothing crazy the other night, just a few happy hour drinks with the coworkers, which quickly turned into a few extra drinks with one of my favorite guys in the office. Then heading home, my roommate was out at the bar, so I had to swing by for a few rounds on him. By this point, I'm stumbling and decide I need more beer. Pick up a six-pack and knock a few back once I get home. Managed to wake up barely in time to catch my bus, throw a suit on, and make a break for the door, when suddenly the hangover kicks me square in the stomach. I run for the bathroom and do the speed puke like a boss. Quick cup of water, and I'm back out the door, catch the bus just on time, and head downtown. Now, on the bus, I start getting these weird looks. I know I'm disheveled looking, but these were some hard stares. I looked down and realized that I had in fact puked like an idiot. In my rush out the door, I didn't notice that I had let vomit splash all over the crotch of my pants. I was covered, but there was no way to back out now. Scurried up the back stairs of the office, ran into the bathroom, and managed to sop up most of the obvious stain. I planted myself at my desk for the rest of the day as best I could, and while everyone knew I was hungover, I think I managed to sneak my puke-covered pants by for again. I'm just calling in sick next time. Story 96. Working a 9-to-5 data entry cubicle rat job, rocking out to some Zappa on my iPod. Was told almost 3 hours later that I had indeed been singing out loud while I walked to and from the copy machine. I can only imagine what the nice ladies in chart recovery thought as I strolled happily through their department singing, "Ram it, ram it, ram it, ram it inside." Story 97. I generally, for some unknown reason, fall asleep during meetings or lectures. Don't know why, how, we just, one second I can be awake, and then the next I'm past the duck out. The kicker is, though, that I usually think I'm still awake and attentively listening to whomever is talking, which makes it incredibly awkward when everyone is sitting there starting at me and I jolt awake. My boss just shakes her head at me in disappointment. Painfully awkward, since I can't help it. Story 98. I was working the service desk/checkout area as usual and answered the phone. My mother called to let me know my house was on fire, with my cat inside. Took a few seconds to process, and then I was on the floor crying in front of a line of customers. Manager happened to be walking past and carried me to the tea room. Kitty was okay, thankfully. House not so much. Story 99. I plugged my laptop into my docking station at work, then left to get coffee. When I returned, my laptop was blaring snippets of Mr. Hankey's Christmas classics across the workplace. Story 100. I was working as a hospital porter during my summer break from university. Most of the job was routine, moving patients between wards, taking them to scans, helping them get discharged. You get used to saying the same lines over and over. Whenever I arrived with a wheelchair, I'd usually ask something like, "How are you for walking to the chair?" It was just standard phrasing. What I meant was, "Do you need assistance getting in, or can you manage on your own?" One afternoon, I rolled up to a patient's bed and gave the usual line without really thinking. He looked up at me. There was this brief pause. Then, without saying a word, he slowly pulled back the sheet. And in that moment, I realized he had recently lost both of his legs. I don't think I've ever felt smaller in my life. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look on his face said it all. My automatic, thoughtless question suddenly felt incredibly tone-deaf. After that day, I never used that line again. Story 101. I got called into the office for speeding on the way to work. Someone saw a 2-inch logo sticker on the bumper of the company car I was using and called the company to report the license number. Story 102. I got completely soaked one morning walking into work because I forgot my stupid umbrella. It was literally like I jumped into a pool with a full dress suit on. I work in a huge office, so everyone I saw that day had some lame comment. That sucked. I also remember I put some white zit cream on my nose, forgot that I had done so, and went to work. I was a cashier at the time. When I got to work, they were having a group meeting, so everyone saw it at once. I told everyone it was cake. Story 103. We had a project manager, who was absolutely useless and a pathological liar. He sent our departmental manager an email that contained a big lie. The departmental manager was my best friend, and he forwarded my PM's note to me, asking if what he said was true. I wrote back that it was a lie, and without thinking, he forwarded my comments to my manager, asking him to explain why he was lying. Great friend, right? Thank goodness for the ability to pull back an email, since fortunately he wasn't in his office at this time. Story 104. My boss and I were in his office making obnoxious prank phone calls to a coworker. I laughed so hard I peed my pants. I spent the rest of the afternoon with a sweater tied around my waist to hide the wet spot on my pants. Story 105. I used to work at a landscape design company with 3 beautiful women. I worked in one room while they worked in the other. One day I had my headphones on and the music was pretty loud, so my boss walks in and she calls me. I didn't notice her at first, but then she yelled my name, which made me literally jump out of my seat. I was scared crapless. Needless to say, what followed was a very awkward moment, especially because of the fact that I used to play Macho Man around them. I'm still embarrassed to this day. Story 106. I used to work in a lab up in Boston where we would test out experimental substances on mice with Ailes and Huntington's disease in an effort to find some sort of treatment. On my 4th day on the job, we had a training session on how to inject these mice in their peritoneal space, loose skin around the groin and armpit, in order to cause the least amount of pain/damage to the mice. Being the science geek that I am, I decided to Wikipedia peritoneal space to learn a little more about it, mainly because I was dozing off during training. Mixing the two up, I look at this instead since the internet connection on our lab computers were pretty much awful. I click on the page, get bored while waiting for the page to load, and wander off to go eat and do other stuff. I left this on my computer for about 3 hours, and all the other lab techs sharing the room with me are girls. Story 107. I was working at an auto parts store, where we had to wear blue or black slacks as part of the uniform. While stocking items on one of the aisles, I squatted down to pick up a box and split my pants right down the crotch seam, clearly exposing my very white underwear. It wasn't very busy, but there were several people on the aisle. I quickly slipped into a stockroom area behind one of the wall shelves and used the phone to call the manager and explain what happened and that I needed to go home and change. He said no problem, but word spread quickly, and as I was about to walk out, he announced on the PA for all associates to the front of the store like it was busy and they needed help. I had to walk by each of them to get to the exit, and every one of them gave me a hard time about it. It was pretty funny, but I was probably a very deep shade of red. Story 108. I have a reputation in the office for spilling coffee on important documents. It's only happened twice, but it's enough for people to tease me about making sure I don't bring coffee with me into certain rooms, meetings, etc. Story 109. I've found that whenever you fart in public and realize later that you shouldn't have, just say safety, and everyone thinks you're totally badass and chill. Story 110. I accidentally called a client a woman, even though he's a guy last week. In my defense, his name is Courtney. Courtney! I have never heard that as a guy's name. And there's a whole slew of things I'm embarrassed about that I can't even remember now. I feel like I'm constantly embarrassing myself by making stupid little mistakes.